a narrow segment of history tonight. It started in April of 1987 when the Reagan Foundation trustees made the public announcement that they were going to look for a site in Southern California. Rita and I were having breakfast, and I'm reading this in the Times. She and I both went to Stanford, and I'm thinking poor Jane and Leland Stanford spinning over in their graves because the current trustees can't find a place for the Reagan Foundation, the official repository of American history in that time period. And it dawns on me, because I'm a real estate guy, there's a gating issue. How do you go about looking for a site for a presidential library? The gating issue is you either want to be near a major institution or need to be, or you don't. If you want to be near a major institution in Southern California, you drive around UCLA, you drive around SC, you drive around Loyola Marymount, Occidental, Cal Lutheran. And I was born and raised in Southern California and had driven all over the town because I used to drive delivery trucks. That's going to be tough to find a site in Westwood. It's going to be expensive, it's going to be time consuming, it's going to be very difficult. If you don't want to be or don't need to be, then the site selection process is completely different. Go find a big site with a view of the ocean and have it closer to Bel Air than further. And we happen to have one of them. So I called my partner and I said, Jerry, they're looking for a site. I recommend we offer them 100 acres. We owned 650 that we had bought 2 years before, and I'll get into detail on that more. But that's how it started out, was the foundation, in their public announcement, said they had a $60 million budget for the cost of the building, and they budgeted $20 million to find a site someplace in Southern California. So, the article also mentioned a guy named Gary Jones, and Jones was running the Reagan Foundation in a small office in Washington, D.C., because it wasn't much of an operation. President Reagan was still in office. So I risked a dime for a phone call to Gary Jones in Washington. Told him that my partner was in Boston. I got to Boston occasionally. I was planning a trip, but I could change and come through Washington a week from Tuesday if he was available at 10 a.m. And I get a comment back, the door will be open and we'll be ready for business. So I show up, and Gary Jones, very nice guy, small, modest office, and he says, what are you guys up to? And I said, well, it looks like you're homeless and we thought we might do something about it. So he tells me that they've got an architect coming out in about 3 weeks to look at a number of sites. I made it clear to him that it was a gift, and he called the next day and said he'd had the architect add on an extra day and he could meet me in Simi Valley. So we're in April of '87. I'm seeing him in May in Washington. I don't know if that's me or not. I think it must be Larry's.
It's from the World War II exhibit.
So he has, Hugh Stubbins is coming out to look at sites in Southern California. Stubbins is the architect who the foundation had been working with at Stanford. And I arranged to meet him in Simi Valley at a restaurant for breakfast at 9 a.m. And I've never met Hugh Stubbins before. I don't know anything about him. I mean, he's the architect, and I've dealt with lots of architects, but I really don't know much about his background. I meet him at the restaurant and say, how was your day? How was your tour? And he says, what the hell do you have to show me? I said, got it. I guess it wasn't a very good tour. He said, the last thing they showed me was a gravel pit in Irwindale.
Now, can you guys all imagine we wouldn't be volunteers at a gravel pit in Irwindale?
So I said, you know, real estate really shows itself. It's only a half a mile away. Why don't we just go see it and you make some decisions or comments there? And I had a helicopter ready on Madera at about Wood Ranch Parkway. And we come around. It's a beautiful day. Crystal clear, and you can see the Channel Islands. We get in the helicopter, fly around, seize the area a little bit, and then we land on the site. And helicopters in those days cost about $600 an hour when you're flying, and a small charge. But he set us down, and I said, please turn it off so we can get a sense of how quiet it is. And he wanted to walk around and see things for a while. And I began to hear words like, this is special. This is impressive. This is really very beautiful. And I'm enough of a salesman to know this guy kind of likes this. And there's an interesting part of the deal that people don't quite understand. His job is to find him a site. He's already designed a building. And he really wants to have a wonderful place to set his beautiful building. And if he goes into Westwood, he may be next to a tattoo shop. And about a third of the size that he had planned. But now that he's found a site, his building that he's designed, the foundation's going to approve it. Mr. and Mrs. Reagan are going to approve it. But he really has the ability to maintain the same thing without reducing the quality of his building. So he says, do you have any information on this site? I said, yeah, got a title report, got a geology report, got a boundary survey, got a topographic survey. And he said, well, we may need a lot of electricity. He said, we're not in the electricity business. Talk to Southern Cal Edison. Maybe it's going to be a communication center. We may need telephone. We're going to need a lot of telephone. I said, we're not in the telephone business. Talk to Pac Bell. California has earthquakes. And what about geology? I said, talk to God. He made it. And it hasn't changed since he made it. And Larry, at this point, probably good to give a little history on the property. There was Mr. and Mrs. Wood owned a cattle ranch that was about 2 miles by 3 miles. Pretty productive cattle ranch, I'm told. And Mr. Wood died in the late 70s or early 80s, and the widow Wood sold it, and a development company bought it. And part of the transaction in their sale was that the property on this side of Madera Road, the 650 acres that Blakely Swartz ultimately owned, was given to the broker as a commission. So instead of giving him a check, they gave him 650 acres. And he went and pledged that land for a loan of $2 million from Crocker Bank. Last seen, he was smiling as he got on a plane to Venezuela. It has not yet been. So the land went into foreclosure and into the hands of Crocker Bank. And so Crocker Bank owns the property, and I got introduced by our attorney to the guy who was handling this for Crocker Bank. And said, we'll pay you $2 million for that, $300,000 down, and note for $1.7 million for 5 years. I think it was at 8% interest. I don't remember the interest. So for $2 million, and there were two valuable parts that Blakely and I saw. There was about 40 acres on Madeira Road at the end closest to Simi Valley. There was about 50 acres right at the intersection of Wood Ranch Parkway. So each of those two we personally valued at $1 million each, because we didn't know and didn't have any plan to do anything with the rest of the property at that time. So we acquired the property. The city of Simi Valley is in a general plan mode at this time from 85 to 1987. Let's see. The Reagan Foundation was quiet and a bit secretive about who they were talking with. There was nothing strange about that to me. They were looking at sites that people may be willing to sell them. It may be owned by people of great political importance, and they didn't want to be committed or pre-committed. They were very concerned about their reputation. So we are then asked by Hugh Stubbins and a guy assisting him, Fred Hummel, to be prepared for a meeting. Mrs. Reagan wants to see the last 3 sites that are being considered. And so we're given a date to be ready for that. And she drives up, and the Secret Service leave her car down there. We have a 4-wheel drive vehicle because this is a bumpy cattle trail to get up to the top. And Hugh Stubbins, Mrs. Reagan, and myself are there. And she looks at it and says, this is really lovely, Hugh. Where would the front door be? And his response is a beautiful one. Where would you like it, Miss And we had survey stakes to point out certain things, a corner of the property and a high point on the property. And talking some more about, because they had designed the building at Stanford and gotten it approved by the federal government, and here's the site with no tattoo parlors near it, and plenty of room to spread out and be comfortable with a beautiful view. So he doesn't have to change his design much. He can set it up the way he wants it. The Secret Service says, Mrs. Reagan, we've got a schedule to keep. There's 2 more sites we have to see. She said, oh no, I think this one's fine. We won't have to see those. And that's how the decision got made on where it would be.
So Don, can you go back a few months or a year or so before and tell everybody what did happen with Stanford?
Well, I held no official office at Stanford other than co-captain of the football team. And my oldest daughter, Sarah, was going to school there at the time. She was a freshman. Jerry's daughter was there at the time as a sophomore. I think it was kind of what goes on today. It's protesting by students and faculty. I think Stanford wanted to control Stanford has a provision in their founding grant that they cannot sell any land. They're never allowed to sell it. And I think they were struggling over who would control hours of service. And they weren't given enough parking. I think they had it on a 10-acre site. And it wasn't a bad site, but there was nothing really great about it. And I think they probably felt that they held all of the aces. That Reagan's government papers had gone to the Hoover Institute, which is on the campus, and they'd worked for a long time. And I think President Reagan probably came to the point where he said, look, I'm going to live in Bel Air, and it's a long drive to Palo Alto every day. So why don't we get something closer to home? So I said Mrs. Reagan made the decision. She was not a trustee of the foundation. She didn't hold any office. She clearly had a lot of influence.
You think?
I think with her on my side, I was doing pretty well. Blakely and I were in Northern California. We had bought a large property up in Butte County, not far from Chico State. And we're having breakfast in the restaurant, and a woman comes in and says, Mr. Blakely, Mr. Swartz, there's a Mr. Smith and a Mr. Jones on the phone for you. And so we race up to Jerry's room, and it's Gary Jones, who's still the director of the foundation, and William French Smith, who's the new chairman. When they decided not to go to Stanford, they retired W. Glenn Campbell, who had been the chairman of the board, and William French Smith, the former attorney general, became the president of the board of trustees. And he said, we have an official meeting, we're going to recommend your site tomorrow, and I'm sure the trustees are going to go ahead and do that. And then we want to put forth a public announcement, and I'd like to just read it to you. It's three paragraphs long, and tell me if it's true or not, and we did. He said there's two other things that we'd like. And Jerry says, and what's that? He said, well, the President, Mrs. Reagan, would like to invite you to the White House. And Jerry's the greatest salesman of all time. Leaps right in and says, tell the President, Mrs. Reagan, and my wife Tinley and I will be happy to be there at their convenience. And what's the second thing? He said, well, it's a real estate deal, so we kind of need a little document. Oh, Don is really good with legal documents. He'll have one on the desk at Gibson Dunn tomorrow before the end of business. So in California, to convey land, you have to have a legal parcel. And we had offered the Reagan Foundation not to exceed 100 acres. We only had two legal parcels. One of them was 250 acres, and the other was 400 acres. So in order, they had to file a map and create the parcel. And we asked them just to hold one corner and said, design it to your preference, whatever you want, we can match. You're doing the really important work here, and we can match and connect with you wherever it's needed. And in order to file that, you have to have what's called a parcel map. The property was unincorporated in Ventura County, not a part of Simi Valley at that time. And so the way to give them some stature, you can't just go file a map on a stranger's property. You have to have some connection. So I came up with the idea of giving them an option on a gift. And an option is an asymmetrical agreement. The foundation would have the right to take the land at no price, but not the obligation. If it, for some reason, it didn't meet their need, if they discovered something they didn't like about it, if they got a better deal someplace else, all they had to do was say no thanks. And so I called my attorney and said, I've got to have an agreement tomorrow by the close of business on Wilshire Boulevard. And I'd like you to draw me up an option on the gift. And he says, I draw options all the time, and I can spell the word gift. I've never put them in the same sentence. and I don't know why I do it now. So I said, well, they need to file a map. They have to file a parcel map. They have to have stature on the business. The county's going to say, what's your connection to this? You can show them your option. And that's, in fact, how they started the project. So I think we got the document signed. That was in September of '87. So we came out of no place. Their architect was happy. They had a good price on the property. They were ahead on budget. They asked if they could use the engineering firm that we had used because they had all the information. We said, sure, there's no conflict. And about a week later, I get a call from a real estate broker in Los Angeles that I know. It says the Catholic Church wants to buy 12.5 acres because they hear you're making a deal with the Reagan Foundation and they want a new parish center. I said, well, they haven't committed yet. They just have an option. And he says to me, I guess we know some people who are way up in that group, and they say they're really going ahead, so can you sell us the land? And we talked, they want 12.5 acres, and they say they want it on the corner of Madera and what will be Presidential Drive. And I said, yeah, we'll do that. We'll sell you that for $1,750,000. And I said, all you have to do is send me the money. I can't give you the property quite yet because I don't have a legal parcel, but you can trust me and I'll do that. They say, Swartz, not only do we listen to your confession, but you know that's not how we do business. So I said, look, I'll make you even a better deal. I'll convey to you the entire 450 acres for the $1,750,000, and you give me back an option to buy everything but the 12.5 acres, and I can buy it in sections at $100 a transaction. And you give me that option for 50 years, because I don't know how long things will take. And he says, you'll deed us the whole property. Yeah. And it'll be free and clear of debt, right? And you'll pay the property taxes. And I said, right, as we own it. And you're just holding it for us. And he said, well, that gets it done. And so we do that. And Fred Hummel, the guy who was assistant Hugh Stubbins and kind of project coordinator, oh no, this is terrible. We need legal documents. Like, we're going to need easements. And I said, that's no problem, I've worked on it. He said, it's going to be really slow. I said, you don't understand. I know Neil Blaney, the director of real estate. He's really good. They have 200 parishes, and, you know, occasionally somebody will leave the house. They're closing 2 and 3 escrows a week. So, and Neil's a great, great mechanic. And I said, look, here's all you have to do. You want an easement? Sign and notarize the document for the Reagan Foundation. Give it to me. I'll sign it and notarize it. I'll FedEx it to Blakely. He'll sign it and notarize it. FedEx it back to me. I'll walk it to the Archdiocese. And we got them all signed that way. None of them ever took them more than a week. And the church ended up, let me see, we bought part of them back, and there was the last piece that we didn't get back until after Jerry and I had wound up our partnership. The map recorded November of '87. We deeded the property in December of '87, and then began the construction of utilities in Presidential Drive. We were the owner of the property when the map recorded. As owner, you have the right to propose a name for the road, and So I came up with the name Presidential Drive, and Hugh Stubbins said, can we make that 40, because he was the 40th president. And that's how that decision got made. So there's an awful lot of small mechanics that go on, but it worked well.
Sure did. In fact, maybe I need to talk to you about a land deal. I would like you to take a few moments and talk about your special partner, Jerry Blakely.
Wonderful guy. I met Jerry in 1970. I got out of the business school at Stanford in June of 70. Went to work for Jerry June, I don't know, the next week. Jerry, born and raised in New England, went to Bowdoin College, served as a Navy pilot in World War II. And they were building the first freeway around Boston. And Jerry saw that this would change real estate values dramatically and began buying property at the off-ramps. And he bought a company called Cabot and Forbes. And it was a property management company for two very affluent families. And Jerry's the first guy that ever used the phrase industrial park, planted trees and grass near industrial buildings. And Cabot and Forbes became a very big company and made him a wealthy guy. He also owned the Ritz-Carlton hotel chain, which was small at the time but got bigger and bigger. But it's known to be above average quality and price. And when he bought Cabot and Forbes, he got a construction company called Aberthaw Construction. And Aberthaw had built Harvard Stadium, and they were really great in concrete. And those were the three companies that really created the majority of wealth for Jerry. He had come to California in 1960 and was the original developer of Laguna Niguel. He bought a 6,000-acre cattle ranch, built Ground Valley Parkway from the 405 to the ocean, and held that and ran it, and then sold it in 1970, just as I started with the company. I can't recall who he sold it to. Made a joint venture with Bethlehem Steel in 1962 on 650 acres of industrial land in South San Francisco. And I worked in the San Francisco office when we got started. But Jerry is a man, fine taste, just perfect ethics, always deliver on time as agreed. He was known for doing very fine construction. He was asked by the Kennedy family to do the Eternal Flame in Washington, D.C. And he said, but Bobby, you know I don't do any government work. And he said, well, Jerry, this is not going to be for the government, this is going to be for the Kennedy family. But you know, I'm not a Democrat. He said, Jerry, you do the best granite and tile work in New England, and there's 3 Irish families who really do the same and want to do it here. And if we give it to one, we're going to lose the other 2. Do me a favor. Jerry's dad was a professor at MIT. Jerry was founding the graduate school for real estate development just at the time we started our partnership. So Jerry had sold off his big companies and was kind of in a very liquid position. Always liked California, had a daughter who was going to school out here, wanted to continue to do work, so wanted to buy big parcels of land. And this was the second one that we bought. you put names together, G.W. Blakely, MIT, his wife, Tinley Albright's an Olympic gold medalist in ice skating. Just guys led a pretty amazing life. Great guy to work with. We were a very small organization, and you know, half a dozen people here. I was the operating partner. Jerry was the financial and senior partner. We wound up in 1990. Jerry called and said, Don, there's a big storm coming. I said, Jerry, I'm looking out the window here, and it's bright and sunny in Southern California. He said, the best thing to do when there's a storm coming is head to the nearest port. I said, you know, Jerry, we don't put on our galoshes out here because it's sprinkling on Cape Cod. He says, am I still the captain of our ship? I said, yes, sir, you are. He said, well, thank you for that. Please wind up everything, give people an appropriate severance, and close the offices, and I'll be out in 60 days, and we'll split the properties. So that was in 1990, and Jerry was the senior partner and took all of two parcels, and Rita and I ended up with about 6,000 acres right in the city limits of Chico, California, which we held for a long while.
So what I want to take you back now to your meetings with the President and Mrs. Reagan.
Jerry made the trip to the White House. I was doing the documents. There's a picture we were able to send. I met the President on the site after the construction had started. I had made my own personal commitment that I wanted to make sure the permits were in hand, construction was underway, because we weren't involved in any of the construction. And so I met him and said, here on the site. There was I did have a wonderful phone call. I was back visiting Jerry late in '89 in Boston. Jerry had built 3 high-rise buildings on State Street in Boston, 60-story buildings, and had his office on the penthouse on one, and he ran a luncheon club. The Bay Club is kind of like the California Club in downtown Los Angeles. And we're there for lunch, and Jerry's secretary comes running in and says, Don, President Reagan's on the phone for you. I said, yeah, sure. She said, that's what I said. But no, it really is. I could tell his voice, and he says he wants to talk to you. So we raced down to Jerry's office, and I had created these caps, and there's one of them over there. It's baseball caps for the construction guys that were here. It said, building one for the Gipper, and it has an American flag on it. And they went like hotcakes. And I thought I was going to see a lot of them on the site. Guys were putting them up on the mantelpiece of their home. And I had told Jerry we were doing this. And they don't do a lot with baseball caps at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel chain. I guess that's the way they do things in Southern California. Never want to be insulting his partner at all, but this wasn't his style, and he had it on a credenza in his office. But so we raced down, and we're in Jerry's office, and I pick up one phone, I say, hello, Mr. President, and he said, Don, just want to tell you I love hats. I got a large collection of hats. Yours is the only hat that I have that has an American flag on it. I said, well, Mr. President, that's wonderful. And we're making great progress out there, and glad everything's going well. Sure like my hat, Don. And I turn and look at Blakely, and Blakely's now wearing his hat. And it's a wonderful insight to the partnership that we have, which is there's opportunity all over the world. We'll go find it wherever we want. And it was always, Jerry, if I'm doing anything you don't like, just tell me and we'll close it down immediately. And he would say the same thing to me. And so those are the stories. I guess there's one more that went on, and I just in the last couple of weeks as I've been reminiscing for over this 35 years ago, which is pretty amazing. Different people in the community would say, so where is this and how can we help out? And I said, write a letter to the president. Because I had sent him a baseball cap and I got a response. How do you write to the president? I said, I think if you address it to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, it'll get there. And copy your local county supervisor. And so people began writing letters. This was a great thing. And I think, I don't know, 100 or so may have gotten back there. And they may be stored in this building someplace. So it was an opportunity that came up. One guy in the newspaper said, why are you doing this? I said, the guy was a great leader and he took an assassin's bullet. You just deserve something. Happy to take any questions.
We're going to do that. Before we take questions, a couple of people are going to get some microphones, and we are going to take some questions. I just want to repeat what Randy Swartz said, and that is Don has offered the documents and items over here to the library, and they include a appraisal of this property, the original appraisal, the original contract, a number of programs for the groundbreaking ceremony, a lot of interesting documents, so you do want to take a look at those. Treat them like the real artifacts they are, however. That's why we have the stanchions there, but please enjoy them before you leave. So with that being said, I see Bob has a microphone. Anybody have a question out there? Okay, wait until you get a microphone so everybody can hear the questions.
It's coming from behind you.
And then Bob, you can find someone and they'll be ready with the next question.
Just checking your age, did you play with Plunkett at Stanford?
Jim was not good enough to play my senior year. They redshirted him. He played the 3 years after me. And I always like to say that a center and a quarterback have a special relationship.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I have a second question. How much earth was removed? Because you have all embankments around the side of the site.
There's two parts of the grading that took place. They exploded kind of 24-foot holes so they could have 2 stories underground with no windows, and that would limit the temperature change. And this whole area was quite rocky, and they said, can we have some dirt? And the dirt that God had delivered here had run down close to Madeira. And we said, you can have all you want of Madeira. And so they dragged all of that up here.
One more question.
Yeah.
Okay. Foundation has acquired 300 additional acres over and above the original 100 acres. How much of those 300 acres were Blakely Swartz?
I don't know is I haven't been, I've been involved only in one of those acquisitions, actually two of them. I was working with the church when they sold the 12.5 acres to the Reagan Foundation just a couple of years ago. And then I recommended that Terry Lanning was the chairman of the board here for a number of years, and he had been chairman for a while at Loyola High School while I was on the board with him. And I told him that Blakely had some land here, and if he contacted Jerry, and I think they ended up taking title. Jerry may have donated that, I don't know for sure.
Who has the next microphone out there somewhere?
They had-
Bob, did you know?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Mr. Swartz, on the aerial photograph behind you, do we know approximately where those silver shovels were used to turn the first soil back on November 21st, 1988?
We came in from Tierra Rajada, so Presidential Drive did not exist. There's a map over there that shows, as part of the artifacts, that shows the way in.
This way.
Perhaps one of the earlier pictures that showed the site earlier than this?
Can we rotate the photo?
I think we would have come off the floor.
Okay. That's Tierra. Yeah, that's on the top.
So, and there you can see where they've blown out, that's 2 stories, it's way taller than the Caterpillar tractor in the hole there.
Yeah.
Would it be near those orange storage units in the center, perhaps? Which would be geographically about the middle of the site.
It would have been, but there was a lot of leveling that took place. But I think they came off of Tierra Rajada, it came up.
Sometimes the best stories are ruined by the arrival of an eyewitness.
Yeah, Jared.
Very fascinated by your story about how all this came together, and I really appreciate you sharing this with us because it's very fascinating. I'm curious to know, because it sounded like Jerry had worked primarily with industrial properties in the East Coast. From the time you purchased the 650 acres from the bank to meeting with the Reagan Foundation to the official donation, was it a big deal to branch out into the sort of single-family homes out here for Jerry and you, or had you worked on previous projects in the past like that?
No, we had no experience in Simi Valley. It looked like the property itself was an attractive purchase at the price we got it. So we paid $2 million, and there was a 40-acre part of it that we thought was worth $1 million undeveloped, and another 50-acre part right at the intersection of Wood Ranch Parkway that we valued at $1 million. So the rest of the land for us was the opportunity to plan something or see something happen.
Yeah, it's amazing. Thank you very much.
Anybody else?
I have another question. Quick one.
I did get audited by the IRS.
I didn't know to ask that question. Should have figured, huh?
They said, Don, you're not usually giving $2 million a year to charity. The appraised value we got of the property was, I think, well, it's over there, but I think it's $8.4 million. And so I was a quarter interest. And they said, we'd like to see you in our Carson office at your convenience. I said, geez, I've never been there before.
It's right near the gravel pit in Irwindale.
He said, did you give this property to Ron and Nancy Reagan? And I said, no. Went to the Reagan Foundation, charitable organization. And they said, can can you prove that? I said, yeah, here's the deed. Are they a charity? And I said, yes, they are. He said, how do you know? I said, well, actually, I've got a letter from you guys saying they really are a charity. And Jerry was more experienced than me. He'd gone to Bowdoin College in Maine and been on their board for 40 years. I think he'd taken gifts in kind and made gifts in kind. There was worry if somehow the library didn't proceed, Jerry wanted to have some reversionary rights that came back. We were given this for a library, for a presidential library, for Ronald Reagan's presidential library, other uses of it, got a reversionary right. The guy from the IRS says, well, these reversionary rights may make sure may disqualify. It's not a completed gift. Completed is the word. They said, here's one more document. 3 days later, I filed a quit claim that said, we have no interest. So all the reversionary rights were gone. So they're on the original deed which conveyed it, so it's a matter of public record, and you can read them if you're interested. Anybody can. But the quit claim is shortly behind it.
Carolyn, you got something there?
Okay, thank you very much. With the property within the sphere of influence of so many different cities, Thousand Oaks, Moore Park, Simi Valley, and it not yet being annexed into Simi Valley, how many hoops did you have to jump through in terms of approvals? Was it just the county, or did you have to get the cities to buy into everything you were doing as well?
You used the legal term sphere of influence, and that's a serious zoning term. But the property was not in the sphere of influence of any city. It was unincorporated in the county. There was a part of our property that was in what they called the Tierra Rajada open space.
So the Greenbelt area?
And again, it was a conversation about a green belt among the cities, but they never passed it and never finalized it. And so the foundation was the one filing the map and setting the parcel the way they wanted. So they were the applicant. Blakely Swartz was the property owner, but our option says the applicant has the right to make those decisions. I think they moved very fast. The county moved very fast to change the general plan to say that governmental buildings were allowed or were offered to be allowed. And that was, we were not a part of the application. We didn't want to be a part of the application. The Reagan Foundation didn't want us to be a part of it. If we're looking to build 40 homes and some senior housing, that they were interested in getting a presidential library done. And the county was interested in getting, and they didn't want to do anything that would make their project a target for something that we weren't requesting.
So the foundation was actually probably working with the county to get their permits? And
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you very much.
I think the annexation was maybe 10 years late.
Jana?
So clearly Mrs. Reagan was enamored of the property when she first saw it.
Yes.
At what point did President Reagan first view the property, and what do you remember was his reaction to it?
I don't know when he physically stepped on the property. I've heard stories that he flew over. They were really even afraid to tell us that Mrs. Reagan was coming, but they needed a vehicle to get up here, and they needed survey stakes. And so I just don't know. My sense, there was a desire to get it done. But I just don't know when he first walked on the property. Some people have said he flew over it, and that may have been the case. They seem to work pretty well together, and he may have delegated that to her. He may have waited to see the final choice, but because there were still three, and he may have been waiting for the scorecard. She said there's one.
Yes, Bob?
You were a football lineman in college, majoring in economics. Did you ever run across anybody else with a similar background?
I know a lot of football players, and I actually know a lot of economists. But you're talking about somebody and I'm not making the connection.
President Reagan.
I never thought of him as an economist. No, I enjoyed the study of economics, but the great thing about Ray, he had this beautiful voice. And you folks keep that alive.
Just one question. I'm just curious why the initial property went into foreclosure and the Crocker Bank took ownership of it.
The guy never intended, he just wanted to get his commission. With this property, if he went to Venezuela, he wasn't going to live very well. With $2 million, he could live well.
And you said it wasn't long before Crocker Bank went broke.
No, well, that happened too. I think the sale may have been, he may have gotten the loan in '82, and they had taken it back by '85 when we got it.
Okay, any other questions? Larry, over here. Okay, great.
The person who introduced you said that you do work with the Archdiocese. Was only the church that you bought down the street from here? Is that the only work that you do with the Archdiocese?
No, I helped the Archdiocese. We ended up getting 27 acres for a new school site in San Pedro, part of the Base Realignment and Closure Act. There was some housing, and helped get that. Our parish had bought 3 or 4 houses. I had helped them. The fellow who runs all the real estate now, Mike Davitt, is a guy I've known for 30 years, and he occasionally calls if they have a problem or need some help. So I've worked with them on real estate matters 30 years.
Okay, anything else? Last call. Okay, Carolyn.
Mr. Swartz, I haven't heard anybody say it yet. I sure do thank you for the gift that you gave. It's a feather in the cap of Simi Valley to have this property and this beautiful facility here. So thank you, Blakely Swartz.
Let me just say 2 things in response to that. It's really what land planning and city planning ought to be about, is creating value. And some of that value is for the private sector, and some of that value is for the public sector. And this gift and this facility I view as being of great value to the public center. Forgot the other one. I'm 76 years old and I'm fading.
Okay. You know, say that. Please. So, like I said, this is our first meeting with a speaker. in 3 years, and we're so grateful to you. You've shed light on something that we all have heard little bits about, but never heard the whole story. And your wit and charm comes right on through. And so we want to thank you. And this is from all the docents, everyone here in the room. And we can't thank you enough.